All right, we are live. Share my screen. Okay, so yeah, we have two last lectures today. I'm going to try to squeeze them both in. I probably can squeeze them both in, to be honest. And then if there's some time at the end, maybe we'll do a little CSS exercise or something just to make things look a little bit more pretty, or whatever you guys want. Okay. So the first lecture is all about refactoring. Akanyele just asked me, is refactoring the same thing as refactoring in any other language? Yes, it is. So refactoring, you guys probably overheard me, basically means changing your code without really changing the functionality, right? So, drying up your code, for people who don't know what dry is don't repeat yourself, right? So removing repeat code, refactoring things to be a little bit more efficient, things like that. So the nice thing with Rails is there's a couple little things that we're going to learn today that you probably will use more regularly. It's not like we've gone through this exercise and now we can refactor things. To be honest, the things you'll learn today, you'll probably say like, that's how you probably code from the start. The reason I taught you guys the way I taught you, so you understand things a little bit more clearly. But now that you understand it, you don't actually have to code certain things anymore, which is really nice. So that'll be the first thing, refactoring. Then the second part is all about where to go from here. Okay, so where can you take your learning from here? What should you learn next? If you're pretty excited about web development and you want to research some stuff and do some learning by yourself in the summer or whatever, that is what we're going to go to in session 8. I also asked you guys if you have any questions, you can bring them. Does anybody have any questions? It's okay if you guys don't. Okay, so I'll assume that we're going to take up the time then with session 7, 8. I will stick around afterwards too if you guys have any assignment questions or anything like that you want to sort out. It'll be good. But today is particularly fun. I'm kind of sad that not more people are here because after all your hard work, there's a lot of cool shortcuts today that we're going to learn. A lot of fun stuff. Some stuff that I caution you use, some stuff that I say you should use all the time. But it is kind of the fun part of Rails because there's a lot of stuff we've been coding up till now, and we've been saying like, oh, this is pretty cool. Oh, it's nice that Rails has this stuff built in. But there's probably a lot of stuff in here that it's like, whoa, this is a little bit more complicated. Like, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do this? You'll find out the reason you had to do that is simply because I'm teaching you. You don't actually have to do that in your day-to-day code. Okay. And the really nice thing about this too is hopefully that after today, your code will look very similar to production code that other people have online, stuff like that. So when you go to look at code on the web and you're looking up tutorials, you're not like, whoa, this doesn't look like Rails at all. I didn't learn any of this stuff. Like, what are these like functions that I've never heard before? After today, all the stuff we'll be coding today will be stuff that regular production code uses. I myself, for example, I'm running into an issue like that with JavaScript. So JavaScript right now, there's a lot of different flavors of JavaScript coming out. There's ES6, there's ES7, ES8 maybe, or ES 2015 as well, ES 2016, all these different flavors of JavaScript. And I'm kind of intermediate in JavaScript right now, nowhere near an expert, maybe not even intermediate, maybe just a beginner. And when I go online and I look at JavaScript, there's some stuff that's coded in a completely different version of JavaScript, and I have no idea what's going on. I look at it and I'm like, Jesus, I have no idea what's going on. So hopefully you won't run into that with Rails. Okay, obviously there's still a lot of stuff for you guys to learn in Rails. I've been doing Rails for about 5 years now, and I still am far from an expert. So there's still lots of stuff to learn. And I wouldn't say I've been lazy. I've been actively learning Rails over and over again. I read the guides over and over again. I read new stuff over and over again, but I still don't feel like I'm scratching. Maybe I'm scratching the surface a bit, but I'm not really getting that deep at this point. Okay, so fire up your guys' Rails servers, get your Sublime code up, because we're pretty much jumping right into the coding part of the exercise. This is the first time we're breaking our feedback. So we remember that feedback session we had last semester I talked about? I said every lecture was going to have a lecture piece, a coding piece, and a homework piece. Well, session 7 and 8 do not have homework pieces. Session 7 barely has a lecture piece. It's basically just that, what I just said now. And session 8 does not really have a coding piece, okay? Maybe a little bit, we'll see, okay? Someone let that person in. Okay, so here is the lesson today. Refactoring, that's it, pretty much. What we're gonna do is we're gonna change our code, okay, in ways that is not gonna change our functionality, but make our code a little bit more efficient. I will say one thing about this lecture, though. What you're about to do is you're about to refactor your code to more usual Rails programming. So in other words, the stuff that you guys have been doing up until now is not really the usual way Rails programmers program. Okay, and I said it like 3 times already today. The reason you're coding the way you're coding up till now is as a teaching lesson. Okay, the way I showed you guys how to do certain things, it's a lot easier to understand than if I showed it to you right from the beginning this way. Okay, but you're going to be refactoring now to get to that level of a regular Rails program. Okay, refactoring in general goes beyond that though, right? Refactoring, you're generally doing things where you're still coding in the regular Rails way, but you will optimize your methods, right? You'll optimize the way your code looks and the way it's written and all that stuff, right? So refactoring really doesn't stop here, and refactoring is no different than any other language, right? You're constantly trying to improve your code, right? One of the best development cycles is called red-green refactor. And so what they say is that every time you code red code and then green code, which we'll get into a little bit later, and then the last step you do is refactor. So after you coded it once, you go over it again to see how you can improve it, basically, right? Something that probably not a lot of us do, and a lot of us probably think we don't have time to do it, but it's very valuable. Okay, so we are going to refactor. Okay, we're going to get right into coding. So fire up your Rails server itself. Okay, so once you've got your Vagrant box up, Vagrant SSH in, and start up your Rails server. So Rails s-b 0.0.0.0. Okay. Once you have that, get your Sublime up and running as well. We're going to be editing a lot of code today. So Vagrant, my website, start the server, and get your browser up and running and navigate to your actual website. So localhost 3000. Server's actually up and going. Okay, so if you guys have been following up to this point, your website should look something like this. Okay? Okay, let's get into some code refactoring. So the very first thing we're going to do is take a look at our routes.rb. Okay? Now, who wants to take a stab at explaining what a restful resource is after all this time? It doesn't have to be right.
It is a standardized way that the server interacts with the client.
Good. That's a great answer. Any more?
Like 7 vehicles like post, index, and all these things. Like you develop your code with these 7 basics, so that like everything is standardized and whatever thing is going on, you know what's going on.
That's great. That's awesome. That's a great explanation. It's a standard way to interact with a certain entity, right? Using these 7 like protocols for posting and all stuff like that. Ultimately, to execute CRUD actions, right? Create, read, update, destroy. That's what we do, right? So we standardize this in the web world. We said if you're going to post to something called products, okay, that's going to create a new product. If you're going to do get products, that's going to return a list, right? So this is something that's standardized, right? And that most of the web world has agreed upon, and most of the web world who hasn't got agreed upon that is catching up to that, okay? It's a very standard protocol. It's been around for a long time, and this is a big thing we've been doing, okay? So we've been coding RESTful resources, right? So Ruby on Rails, like I said from the beginning and over again, is a convention over configuration. It's a convention over configuration language and framework. What that means, okay, is it favors you following conventions rather than you writing configuration. Okay, I'll give you a perfect example. If you have a database table called users, okay, if you name the model user, okay, with a capital U, and your table is named users, small u pluralized, as long as you follow that convention, you don't have to hook up anything. You don't have to specify that this model is going to connect to this table. You don't have to tell Rails that. If you stray from that, then yes, you have to configure it. You have to say, this model class is going to use this table, okay? But Ruby on Rails said, if you follow our conventions, the way that we tell you how to uppercase things, the way how you lowercase things, the way how you pluralize, the way how you singularize, all that stuff, if you follow our conventions, we'll do the configuration for you, okay? So it favors convention over configuration. Now, we just talked about RESTful resources as being a standardized way to interact with things. It's a convention. It's a standard thing, Okay, so Ruby on Rails says that we are following this convention. We're doing this. Okay, so if we're following this protocol and we're following this standard way to interact with things, okay, shouldn't Ruby on Rails help us out with this? Okay, shouldn't they help us out with coding this? Okay, and they do. Okay, so if we go to our routes.rb file, this is our routes.rb file. Right? We have our 7 ways to interact with our RESTful resource. Right? We follow the convention of the way we label blog posts. It's underscore, lowercase, with plurals. There's ID, there's new, there's edit, and all that stuff. We follow the convention. Okay. Now, you can imagine that bigger applications will have a repeat of this all the time. You'll have blog posts, you have resume entries, you have products, you have invoices, you have purchases, you have orders. You have this repeated a billion times. And they all basically follow the exact same kind of thing, right? So you could maybe write a loop that does it or whatever. You could do all these kind of things to save time, okay? Well, again, Ruby on Rails, being a convention over configuration, says if you follow RESTful resource conventions, we're going to make this a lot easier for you. We're going to create a method that does all this for you, okay? So these 7 lines that we worked to over the last 6 weeks or so to get to, we can basically reduce this to 1 line of code, okay? Ruby on Rails supplies us a method called resources in the routes file that takes 1 argument, and it's a symbol, for the name of your resource pluralized. So in our case, blog posts. Resources, blog posts. And with that 1 line of code, you can basically get rid of all of this. Okay? Pretty handy. But you can see why I taught it the way I taught it to you. Because if I wrote that down, you'd be like, how the hell is all this working? Right? You'd be like, get, post, all this stuff. Like, you wouldn't understand any of that. But you guys understand that now. You guys understand get requests, you understand post requests, you understand delete requests, you understand all that. That's what resources blog post does. This blows up to 7 routes. Okay? If you look at the Rails guides on routes, this is one of the first things they teach you. The nice thing is, as you get further into your Rails development, you will learn more and more about how flexible this method is as well. You can say resources only new, or resources only show, or resources except index, stuff like that. Right? So it can basically do everything that you want. You can even do resources and add custom routes and all this stuff like that. Okay? More and more, besides static pages like our pages controller, almost your entire routes file can probably be written with the resources keyword. Pretty sweet, right? Pretty nice. Resources, blog posts. Now, if everything I said is true, our web app should still work. So let's click around and make sure it still works. All right, go to the blog. Still works. The index still works. Click on new blog post. The new still works. All right, edit. It all works. Okay. This is my problem with how a lot of Rails tutorials go. They start with this, and they have 0 explanation as to what that explodes into, and 0 explanation about types of requests and responses and all this stuff. You understand that now. You understand what that reduces to. You understand what that explodes to. Okay? That's the first bit of refactoring we've done. All right. Any questions? Okay? But you should know that, again, this is no different than writing those 7 statements that you did. Actually, I shouldn't say that. This actually does a little bit more than that. So it does everything that you did plus some more. So it's even more powerful than what you wrote a little bit before, okay? All right, great. Let's move on. So that's the first thing, refactoring the routes. All that on the left reduces to this on the right, okay? Second thing, implicit views. Convention over configuration again, okay? So all along, Rails tells us we need new, we need edit, we need index, and that's the general Rails convention, or the general RESTful convention, right? Using the words like index, show, get, edit, new and stuff like that, okay? Now, up until now, we have been labeling all our templates the exact same as well. If you go to your controller, we render the index and the index action. We render the show and the show action. A couple of places where we don't do that, but a lot of places we do the exact same, where the template is named the exact same as the controller action, okay? Now, being Ruby, minimalist, we could take off the brackets, which would be probably a little bit better. Like render, index, render, show, we don't need those brackets, right? Because again, we don't need brackets on methods if it's not ambiguous, okay? But Rails goes a step further and says, if you follow our convention, and our convention is to name your template the same as your controller action, it says if they're named the exact same thing, we will render it for you, okay? Which means you don't need the render statement in the places where they're named the same. Okay, so index, render index, right? They're the same, so we don't need this render statement. So our index method becomes this one line. Where else can we do this? Show, right? Show is the same, so we can get rid of show. Where else? New. Anywhere else? Edit, good. That's it. We can't do it in create and we can't do an update because we're not rendering the same name there. And in fact, we have a redirect in one case, which is not the same case as render. Okay, you can see how our code is getting smaller and smaller, which is really nice. And again, you can see if I showed it to you guys this way, you wouldn't understand what render is all about and how render massages your ERB and puts it into the layout and all that stuff, right? Okay, so that is implicit views. Okay, so the render index is implied. Okay, unless you put your own render, basically. So what happens is the way that Rails works is it goes through this method and says, oh, I haven't hit a render statement yet. But we know in the web we have to return a response, right? So Rails says, you haven't rendered anything, so I'm going to guess you're going to render the index template if I'm going through the index action. Okay? All right, that's implicit views. Strong params is next. Now, this is purely a don't repeat yourself code thing. This is not a specific to Rails thing. This is like a classic, you would do this in any other programming language as well, okay? This is nothing special to Rails. The one thing in this, though, I'm going to introduce to you guys today is private methods. We haven't done private methods in any classes yet, right? So in Java, how do we declare a private method? Private. We put private in front of the method, right? Ruby, it's a little different. Ruby, you actually have a whole section that you say private, and all these methods below the private keyword are private methods. Okay? So what we're going to do here, I'm just going to make my code a little smaller so it all fits on the screen. You can see that when we did strong parameters, remember strong parameters was all about whitelisting parameters that can go through mouse assignment. Okay, that's a mouthful. Basically, you're letting the model update the title and the body. So we did that up top here, and we did that down here. So this method is the exact same in both places, right? So why don't we extract that out to a method that we can call? Okay. So let's create a new method, and it's going to be private. So I like to put all my private methods right at the bottom. So you type the word private. Anything below that is a private method. Okay, that's how you do private methods in Ruby. Now, it's purely a styling or coding style preference, but I was taught that you indent all your private methods so it's obvious. And believe me, this bites you if you don't do that. Like, you will have like 30 private methods, and you're going to the bottom of the screen. You miss that little private keyword that goes past the top of your screen. You're like, why the hell isn't this method running? Right? If it's indented, it signals, oh, I must be in the private, right? So let's create a new method. And I'm going to call the method blog post params. This is one of the best things I love about Ruby. Okay? One of the best things about Ruby is that your method calls don't require brackets, right? They don't require those parentheses around it, right? So what's really nice about that is when you code variables, your variables can look very similar to method calls. Okay? So we have a variable up here called blog post params, right? That we end up using the value in here, right? Well, now that we have a method called blog post params, okay, this kind of gets ambiguous. Now there are all these rules for which one it's going to pick. I believe in this case it's actually going to pick the variable. But when you're doing this refactoring, what's nice is you can just assign a variable for now, and whatever that value of the variable is, you can put in your method, and then you don't have to change the code where you actually use that variable, right? And it's just the nature of the fact that you don't have to use those parentheses, right? If we had to use parentheses, we'd have to change this to have parentheses as a method call, right? So all I'm going to do is take the value params.require.blogpost or require blog post permit title and body, throw that into our method. Now remember, methods in Ruby don't have to require the return keyword. Whatever is the last statement that's evaluated, that's automatically returned. So this gets returned. I can get rid of my blog post params variable. I can do the same thing up in create here. Okay. And because I named my method the same as the name of the variable, I'm done. Right? So what's going to happen right now is you have at blog post equals blog post.new blog post params. Blog post params is a method, right? So it's going to go down to the method, call that value, and throw it back into there. Okay? So that's simple method extraction, right? Any questions about that? Okay, great. This would have helped you. Okay, we have been using view helpers in Rails. I think we only use one, actually, come to think of it. We use form4, right? And what view helpers are Rails methods that spit out HTML in a way that's convenient for Rails to deal with. And sometimes they're more powerful than your regular kind of HTML equivalent. So for example, form4 basically spit out a regular form that you could have coded yourself. You could have coded your own form, right, for the most part. But if we use form4, it names all the fields properly, and it adds any extra little things that Rails expects. For example, it added the authenticity token. It added things like that, right? So view helpers are basically things that we use to generate HTML, but those methods add a little bit of functionality, okay? One of the big places we do this, and I'll tell you, this won't become immediately obvious why you use this in the beginning of your Rails development, okay? Most of the time in your beginning of Rails development, you'll think to yourself, why am I using this instead of just the regular HTML? It doesn't seem like I'm saving any code. It doesn't really seem like I'm saving much, okay? That's true. But as your routes and as your URLs get more complicated, this becomes very, very helpful, okay? So just bear with it in the beginning, get used to using it, and you'll see it'll definitely pay in dividends later on, okay? So what I'm talking about is rather than using the A anchor tag, is we're going to use a method called linkto, okay? The method's called linkto, and it's going to just generate an anchor tag for us, okay? But it is the preferred way to do it because it is more powerful in the future when we use it, okay? So let's take a look at some of our links. So if we go to our views, and let's start with edit. So edit has no links, so let's move on. Index. Index has a bunch of links. We have the new blog post link at the top, and we have a bunch of links down here. We're going to convert all these to linktos, okay? Now linkto is just a method that spits out an anchor tag, okay? It takes 2 arguments. Actually, it takes 3, but we're only going to use 2 in this case, okay? The first argument is the text that you want to appear in the anchor tag. Okay, so view full post, edit. The second argument is the path. Okay, so if you look at our anchor tag, we actually kind of have those flips, right? We have the path first and then the text. It's going to kind of flip when we use linkto. Linkto, the first thing is the text, and the second thing is the path. Okay, so let's start with the very top one here. We are going to use server-side tags, and we're going to use the method linkto. And it's going to take 2 arguments, 2 strings. The first one is the text you want to appear, and the second one is the path itself, okay? So the first one is going to be new blog post, okay? And the second one could be /blog post /new. And then you're done. Linkto is one of the most common places I see Ruby developers not use brackets or parentheses. Okay, so let's follow them as well. Get rid of those parentheses. Now here's where things get slightly more complicated. Okay, but again, I don't have too much time to explain this fully. So remember how I said the resources blog post in your routes file did everything you did in those 7 statements, but a little bit more? Okay. One of the things it did a little bit more is it created these global variables that can be used anywhere in the Ruby on Rails system that map to certain URLs. Okay. Now, this is something that you will just get used to over time when you program more and more Rails or routes. Okay. So when it created the /blog post /new, it actually also created a variable called new blog posts path. Okay, that maps to that. Okay, so we can actually replace this with a variable called new blog posts path. Sorry, not posts, post. I always get this mixed up. That might actually be wrong still, but check it out.
It's with S.
It is with an?
On the slides.
Oh, that's bad. I think it is singular though. Let's try this out.
I think it's not. I got an error.
Without an S?
With an S.
Yeah, it's without an S.
Yeah, without an S. It makes sense, right? A new blog post, right? You're not creating new blog posts, right? Now, there's 2 advantages to this. The first advantage is kind of minimal, to be honest. The first advantage is if you're using variables, it's less likely you will type a mistake. Because if you type a mistake, you'll get an error right away. It says there's no such thing as that path. So you'll catch the error earlier on, before the link is clicked. That's the first advantage. Not a huge selling point, to be honest. The bigger advantage here is, again, in the future, if you decide to change your routes and stuff like that, you can do it in a way that you don't have to change all this stuff. Okay, you can alias your routes and things like that, and you don't have to change things here, which is kind of nice. Okay, so you want to get in the habit of using these variables rather than just using those strings. Okay, now again, unfortunately, I don't have time to explain this all, so you're just going to have to follow along with those variables. I am going to tell you, though, one really handy rake command that will reveal all this stuff, okay? And it's rake routes. Okay, so if you go into your Vagrant SSH, you'll probably have to start up a new session because one of the sessions is being taken up by the server. So Vagrant SSH. So remember how I said resources will spit out 7 routes and a whole bunch of other variables? Okay. Like sometimes it can kind of get confusing reading that routes file. And you don't exactly know what all your routes are, right? Because some you've excluded, some you've included extra ones, all stuff like that. If you ever want a full overview of all the routes that are created from that routes file, okay, all you have to do is go to your application root folder, okay, where you start your server, and just type rake routes. Sometimes it takes a little longer for Rails to kind of generate all this information, okay? But you'll see there, it spits it out all for you, okay? So you can see all the routes that it gave. So get /blog posts, get /blog post ID, patch blog post /ID, put blog post ID, okay? And then you can see all the variables that's going to generate. So the new blog post path, the edit blog post path, the blog post path, and so on and so forth. Okay? Pretty handy little thing. Okay, so we're going to basically use those variables all throughout here, okay? So it's kind of interesting too. You'll see that even for the non-resource routes, like home, about, and contact, it actually also created variables for those as well. So there's home path, about path, contact path, and root path. Okay, so we can use those as well. Okay, so we're just going to convert everything over to that. So if you go back to your index page here, we're going to convert these three. Okay, so the first one, we're going to do link to view full post. And then some path. We'll get into that in a second. The second one is linked to edit, and then some path. And the third one is linked to destroy, and some path. This is not the greatest teaching moment, to be honest, because each one of these is treated differently, actually. All right, so the very first one, we could use that variable that we just talked about. We could do blog post path and pass in the blog post that we want to go to. Okay, which in this case would just be blog post, because this, don't forget, we're in this loop here. And inside each iteration of loop, we have this blog post variable that's being passed through. So you can do blog post path, blog post. Okay. Now, again, Rails pushes it a little further and says if you just pass in the variable, okay, if you just pass in a blog post, any RESTful resource, you just pass in the variable, it's going to automatically map that to the show path of that variable. Okay. So this is the show path of that variable. So in this case, we can just pass in blog post. Okay. So if you link to blog post, if you redirect to blog post, that's always going to do the show version of that blog post. So in other words, slash blog post slash the ID of that blog post. Okay. Edit. Edit, we're going to use the regular one. So edit, there's an edit blog post path. If I go back to my rake routes, you see here, there's edit blog post. Okay, so edit blog post path, okay, which takes in an argument for which one you want to edit. And the one we want to edit is the one that we're going through in that loop, right? Blog post. That answer your question?
I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah. Now again, you can manually type out, like you could manually do this, okay? But you'd have to do string, either add the ID or a string interpolation there. All right, and then the last one, okay, the last one's a little tricky because here, remember, the path itself, okay, is the same as the show path, right? Like look at the hrefs. This path is the same as this path, right? So the path is the same. We just need to pass in this data method delete somehow. Okay? So we'll pass in the same path, which is a blog post, right? That's the show path. And then we need to pass in this data method delete somehow. HTML5, I don't believe before that, introduced this idea of data attributes. Okay? You can have data method, data ID, data blah, blah, blah. It's just a bunch of ways to store extra variables on a tag. Okay? Now, before HTML5, we just did it without the word data dash. We just say ID, method, all this stuff like that. Okay? This just kind of standardized it into one thing, data dash method. Okay? So this is a very common thing in just regular HTML5, not in Ruby on Rails. Okay? So Ruby on Rails says that's a pretty standard thing, this data hash, basically. So let's basically, they said, if you want to pass in a data hash, you basically pass in a hash to the data argument. So I'll show you what that looks like. So they say you pass in an argument, the key is data. Okay. And then you pass in the name of your actual key. So in this case, it would be method. Okay, I have time to explain this. This is a subtle thing that happens in a lot in Ruby that a lot of people tend to gloss over or forget. And to be honest, if you don't remember it, it's not going to hinder your development that much. Okay, you'll just follow the examples and you'll be fine. But I want to explain what's going on in this method call here. Okay. What link2 actually takes in is 3 arguments, 2 strings and a hash. Okay. So 1 string is destroy, 1 string is blog post, and then this 3rd argument should be a hash. Okay. But right now, this is not a hash. Like there's a hash here, but this outer hash doesn't have the curly braces outside. Remember how I told you to define a hash? Start with the curly braces, and then key value, key value, key value, right? But there's no curly braces at the end there. The way a real hash would look is like this. Okay? That's a proper hash. You have the curly braces on the end. Okay? So the way this method would look fully coded out is like this, right? Link2 is a method, takes an argument 1, argument 2, and then a hash. That's how it would look. Okay? The first thing we know that Ruby doesn't require you to have those outer brackets, right? The parentheses, I should say. That makes sense. Then why can we get rid of these? Well, this is another little Ruby thing that says, let's minimize the hell out of our code. Ruby says that if your last argument of your method call is a hash, then you don't require the braces for that hash. So that's why we take off those. Okay? Now, the reason I mention this is because you will see this so often. This Ruby construction of a bunch of arguments, and then the last argument is a bunch of key value pairs without braces around it. Okay? That's because Ruby allows you, if the very last argument in your method is a hash, you can remove those braces. But you should think to yourself that what's happening in the end here is there are actual braces around there. And what's kind of cool about that is that it allows you to have an infinite number of arguments. Because it's just a hash, right? You're passing in a hash. That hash can have anything in it, right? Just think of like the last argument would be an array. That array could have an infinite number of elements, right? So you'll see this construction a lot in Ruby. Okay, this idea that the last argument that you're calling is a hash. Okay, so that's that. Done. We can get rid of these links. Let's go to the new page. There's nothing there in the new page. The show page. Show page, there's just back to blog posts. So we're going to do a link2 there. That's going to go back to blog posts. And the path is the blog posts path. I'll tell you now, your code is probably going to start to look like tutorial code now. When you look up stuff online, stuff like that, link2 is all over the place. Link2, I will say, is one of the Ruby helpers though that doesn't do a whole lot of magic, to be honest. It's doing a lot of one-to-one mapping. Like if you put a class in here, that class gets applied to the link. If you put a data method in here, that data method, like Form 4 does a lot of magic. It adds like authenticity token. It names things all crazy and stuff like that. Like Link2, you're generally coding as much as you would code the regular href, to be honest. Okay, and then the last thing we're going to do is on the layout itself. We have all these anchor tags. Let's change all those as well. So here we have link to home. Just going to go to the home path. We have link to blog. Go to the blog post path. Link to about. We're going to the about path. Link to contact. Screw the contact path. If you're ever unsure about where I'm getting those variables from, look at your rake routes. Okay, you'll see that prefix column. Anything that prefix, you can append dash path. You may sometimes see dash URL as well. The easiest way to differentiate the two is dash URL is basically the full URL, including your host and your port and your protocol. Dash path is usually the relative path to the host and protocol. Question?
So for the home path and the about path, is it just like specific path, or whatever page you have, it's going to generate a new path for it.
Say that one more time.
Is it going to generate for everything in the routes, or just like specific keywords like home, about?
I shouldn't say any route, but certain formats of routes. So anything that's just slash and a word, it'll generate one for that. Anything that's in resources, it'll generate for that as well. But I think there's certain other places where it does not generate certain ones. So yeah, it's not based on the keyword. It's based on the fact that it was a slash word route.
So if we change like from about to about us,
Yes,
it's gonna change about underscore us about that.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Okay, I think that's pretty much it.
Do you have to like redesign the nav?
No, because that outputs this outputs exactly what we had before, actually. So if you actually refresh your page, okay, and you right-click and inspect, or you look at the source code, you see that the source code is actually identical as what we had before. So this is why I said linkto is a little bit like, why am I using this? Right? It will benefit you in the future, I guarantee it. But yeah, there is a lot of like, so you know CSS, you're probably asking, how do I put a class on that? All right. So the way you put a class on that is you just add to the hash arguments. So that last hash, you have the, your about path, and then you have hash that says class, colon, and then your class name. And that'll add that to that. Okay, great. So hopefully the whole site is still working. Clicking all these links, that works well. Okay, sweet. Okay, last thing for refactoring, view partials. So this is a way that you can reduce your ERB code. Okay, so we have a lot of template code, and sometimes we want to use the exact same template code all over the place. Okay, we actually have a case of this already, and I probably highlighted it when we did it, and I tried to illustrate the beauty of the form 4 method. If you look at your edit template, and you look at your new template, they're very close. The only thing that's different is the header. Okay? So, and I mean, it's possible we would have other stuff around this, right? Maybe for the new, we'd have like instructions to say, here's how you create a new blog post, right? And the edit we wouldn't, because if they create a new one, they generally know how to edit, right? Stuff like that. But we know the form code is the exact same. And if you don't remember, I was talking about the brilliance that form 4 can interpret the add blog post. If it's a new blog post versus if it's a existing blog post, it'll change how it renders the HTML, actually. But regardless, the ERB code is the exact same. So anytime you have ERB code that's exact same in multiple templates, you can generally extract those out to what's called a view partial. Okay? So how do we do that? First, we need to create a file for that partial. Okay, and then we just put that code into the partial, and then we say render that partial. Okay, so first rule about partials: don't talk about partials. No, that's completely false. First rule about partials: they all start with an underscore. Okay, so we're going to create the file name starts with an underscore. So we're going to create a partial inside blog posts. Okay, so in that folder, just right-click, create a new file, and save it. Sublime's finicky, make sure you're saving in the right place. And it always starts with an underscore. So underscore, and I'm going to call this form. You can call it whatever you want. Okay? There's actually no convention here that Rails shortcuts, except in one case, which I won't talk about. All right, form.html.erb. Okay, so it's still an ERB file. So everything you can do in every other ERB file, you can do in this file. Okay? And we're just going to grab the code that's common in both. So just grab this form code in the edit, just cut it, and paste it into form. Okay, and where we took it out, we're going to use the render method. Okay, so we're going to use render. and it just takes in the name of the partial. No underscore. The only reason I emphasize that so much is because I keep screwing that up. I keep putting the underscore in there and it doesn't. It already knows that you're passing in a partial. And we'll do the same thing on new. So get rid of that code and just render form. You can see how confusing Rails would be to a new programmer. You get to a page that has 2 lines of code and you're like, what is this doing? Sometimes that code isn't even there, right? It's like 0 lines of code. What the hell is this code doing? Okay, now, 2 things I want to say about partials. The first is that partials are always looked up in the folder that you're currently in. Okay? So if you're in the new and you're saying render form, it's going to look in the folder blog posts for the underscore form. If you want to use a partial from another folder, all you have to do is prepend that folder name. Okay? So if I was to use a partial that came from the pages, you just do pages like that. Okay? Sorry. So, yeah. That's all you have to do if you're going to use it from another folder. Okay? So sometimes what I like to do is if I have some partials that don't really belong in one or the other, there's no preference, I create a new folder called shared partials. And I put all my partials in there. And I can use them from there. Okay? So that's the first thing. Second thing I want to say about partials. You want to be very careful about access to variables. Instance variables are accessible across the board. Okay? That means all your partials will have access to the same instance variables as the parent that's calling it. So the instance variable is accessible in here and inside the form, as long as it's an instance variable. Yes?
Just clarification. You can pre-append pages because it starts looking an app, right? It looks an app.
Yeah. So like where it looks for form?
Like it looks for form by default in blog post, right?
Yes.
And then if you were to pre-append another folder,
yeah,
how does it know where to go from outside?
Oh, sorry. It's still within the views. It's still within the views
so it
folder.
looks within the views. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. It's still within the views folder.
Yeah.
Sorry. So variable access. So instance variables are accessible everywhere, so you don't have to worry about that. So if you're just using instance variables in the partials, that's okay. You don't have to do anything. Local variables are not. Now we haven't actually used local variables in ERB yet, but you could conceivably create local variables in here. You could do something like this. Let's say for some weird reason you need a temporary variable in there, okay, just in the view to help you do something, okay? That variable is not accessible in the form directly. You have to pass it in, okay? We're not going to go into that, but if you're running into errors or partials, know that you don't have access to all variables, okay? You have access to the instance ones, but not the local ones. Okay, so that's partials. Okay, any questions? Good, okay. That is all the refactoring we're going to do. And all your code now is pretty much in a production state. And any Rails programmer would look at your code and they wouldn't say anything. They look at it and they'd be like, this looks perfect. This is exactly how I would code it as a Rails program. Okay? Cool. Okay, I'm going to show you one more little thing that half the room already knows about because they've been to this course before. Okay? But this is a fun little thing I like to show everybody. It's something that I still use. It is something that a lot of Rails programmers hate and loathe and say anybody who uses this is an idiot. Okay? But I use it all the time, so I'm going to promote it a little bit. But I will say this. I use it as a shortcut to do a lot of things, but I don't just use it and forget it. Okay? So what I'm going to show you, again, half the room knows about this already, so there's less of a build up. Let me just commit this code first. Okay. So last thing in lecture 7 I'm going to show you guys. So we created a blog post, and I commend you guys, and hopefully you still retain some of that knowledge. I know you did. You should get a sticker, by the way, if you have any. Rails resources, and what I said from the beginning is that when you code a Rails project, and if you ever go forward creating web projects not in Rails, REST is a really good architecture, okay? Your goal is to try to make as much of your resources RESTful, okay? So everything from concrete things like products and invoices and purchases to a little bit more abstract things like relationships, okay? Like when you talk about memberships to groups and stuff like that, right? I find it very interesting when software engineers like do things like that, where it's like the relationship between objects, make that a RESTful resource itself, a membership, stuff like that. It's always pretty cool how they think that way. So you're going to be creating a lot of RESTful resources, okay? So we spent 6 weeks coding a RESTful resources, understanding RESTful resources from front to back, okay? This is something so common that Rails has created a super powerful tool to do a lot of this for you, okay? Now, it takes one line of code to create a Rails app. Rails, new, my app, okay? It takes one line of code to create a full-blown Rails resource. Rails generate Scaffold. We create blog posts, right? Let's say I want to create something called news posts. I want to separate my blog and my news, okay? News posts. Let's say it has a title and a body as well. Okay. And that's probably good enough. Okay. So I hit enter. Takes a little while. Keeps you waiting in anticipation. Now it created a whole whack of stuff. You guys spent 6 weeks coding this, okay? It takes one line of code to do everything you just did. Let me show you what it did. Where does all Rails requests start? Where do they come in? Routes. Let's take a look at our routes file. It added our resources and news posts for us. What's really cool too is that like it went into our file and found an appropriate spot for it and put it there. Okay, where does it go after that?
Controller.
Controller, right? Oh, it created a controller for us. Not only did it create a controller for us, it created a controller better than the controller we created. Okay, like it actually extracted some other code for us, like set news post. Okay, but basically it coded what we coded. The index action is there, the show action, the new, the edit, the create, the update, the delete, destroy, created our strong parameters for us, created all for us. This extra stuff that you're seeing, this is where it did one better than us. Not only does it respond to HTML requests, it also responds to AJAX requests. What is AJAX? You'll learn that if you don't know it already. Okay, it actually responds with JSON responses back out. Okay? And it extracted another method called set news post because it took a look at it. Sorry, I didn't do this. But if we looked at it and we saw, hey, look, show is doing the same thing that edit's doing, right? Why don't we extract that to a method? And that's what it did. Extracted that method out for us. So it created all for us. Not only that, it commented it all for us. Look, never trust parameters from the scary internet. Use callbacks to share comments, like it commented all for us. Okay, after the controller, where does it go? Well, actually, it's before that, sorry. It interacts with what? Model. Let's go check out the model. Create the model for us. That wasn't that hard. There's only 2 lines. Then where does it go? Views. Look at news posts. Everything. The form is there. And not only that, again, a better form than we created. There's all this code here that like handles errors and stuff like that. Okay? It creates an edit page for us, an index, and an index that's like in a nice little table, right? A show is even smart enough to do that partial for us, right? All that. in one line of code. Okay, it's crazy. And don't forget, because it created the model, it created the database migration too. The migration's there as well. DB migrate. There's the create news post table. Everything. Okay, one line of code. It's pretty mind-boggling. Okay. Now, the reason people don't like this, okay, is that a lot of people get into Rails development without understanding what's being created here. Okay, they know that they can run Rails Scaffold, and they know it does something that allows you to do new, edit, create, and all this stuff, but they don't understand web requests, they don't understand form submissions, they don't understand the MVC thing, they don't understand all of that. You guys do understand that, okay? So feel free to use Scaffold, okay? The way I do it, okay, the way I use Scaffold is that a lot of the times I don't need an Ajax JSON response, okay? So this is my typical routine. I use Scaffold because I'd rather actually start from a point where I have everything and I scale back versus going the other way where you build it up and I forget things, okay? Now, I say that pretty adamantly, but it depends what day you catch me on. Some days I'm like, I'm lazy, I want to use Scaffold to generate everything. Sometimes I'm like, you know what, this is a really bad way to go about it. It's better to build something up from scratch, okay? I have a strong opinion on that about CSS frameworks. I hate CSS frameworks. I hate Bootstrap, I hate Materialize, I hate all those. Because every time I've gone down that route, I've eventually just scrapped it and started from scratch. Okay, it's led me to way less confusion, way less bugs. Anyways, but here I'm kind of 50-50 on it, to be honest. Okay, this is what I do. I run Rails Scaffold. Okay, and usually where I need to clean up stuff, I clean up stuff in the controller. The controller is where things are most, robust. Not robust. A lot of stuff that I don't need. Okay, so what I typically do is I come into the news post controller here. First thing is, I don't like all these comments. I know what all this stuff does. So what I typically do is I do this, select all these comments here, and I get rid of those. Then what I do is I don't need this format JSON stuff, so I get rid of all that stuff too. Okay, and then what I typically do is I get rid of the format HTML. Okay, get rid of this respond to block. Okay, and then what I'm left with is what you guys have coded. Okay, so all that extra stuff that I did create for us, that better controller, I didn't even need anyways. Okay, there are some cases where you do need them both. Okay, but in this case, I didn't need it. Okay, so Scaffold, it's pretty cool. And again, I do use it a lot. And I do find it does help a lot. Okay, but now you guys understand all this stuff. You know what news post parameters, strong parameters, stuff like that. You know what these requests are. You know what resources in the routes is doing. Okay, question.
I'm assuming you can't get into because that one line, it generates it from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Can you edit anything to make it to choose what you want it to generate?
Sure. So that generator is part of the Rails code. Okay. Now it does accept options. Okay. Actually, there's something else for the CSS crew. It also generated CSS for us. Look, it gave us all the CSS for us, so our forms look nice and everything. So one of the things, for example, is that you might not want style sheets in your scaffold, right? So there's arguments you can pass in like -- no style sheet, and it won't generate that. Okay. You know what else it did? It generated automated tests for us. Okay. There's all these tests actually that we don't cover in this class. It generated all these automated tests for us. Let's say you want to write your own tests. You can say no tests and stuff like that. Okay. Now on top of that, Ruby on Rails is open source. If you really want to tweak the generator, you can. You can view their code and you can tweak the generator. Or you can actually, there are ways you can create your own generators as well. So yeah, you definitely fully customizable. Okay. Any questions?
What does notice mean?
Notice? Where did you see that? There's a couple of places that could appear, but
In the news post controller.
in the news post controller. Here?
Yeah, it's like a message.
Yeah, so what a notice is, so this is part of the Flash infrastructure of Rails. What Rails allows you to do, if I'm not mistaken, yeah. Okay, so what this does, you might have missed this lecture, but redirect is a second request. Remember, I was stressing that over and over again. right? Like, does the first request to create the news post, and then a response of a redirect, and the redirect comes back again. So generally, the second request has no access to anything from the first request. Okay, so any variables we set up here don't end up on the redirect. Okay, except for flash messages. So flash messages are things that are stored, that Rails stores in the session, so that on the next request they'll show up. So what this is that this is a message that you can have access to in the next view, basically in the next request. Now it's up to you to code it to say use that message, but it's available to you at that point. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay. Pretty cool, right? Like why are we coding at all anymore, right? Like we should be able to just like think and then boom, that one line of code comes out and we're done, right? Like it's pretty powerful stuff. Again, there is a lot of controversy around Scaffold. Again, a lot of people don't like using it. Real programmers don't use it. Whatever. Like if you guys understand this stuff, real programmers leverage that. Which brings me to my very, very important point about Rails programming, which I've only come to realize in the last couple of weeks. Okay. So let me tell you a really short story, okay, about nobody in particular. So let's say you have somebody who's like the best runner in the world. No effort at all, okay? They just wake up in the morning, they eat pizza till like death, and they can run like super fast, no problem. Usain Bolt probably, actually, okay? Now that person says, I'm the fastest in the world, I don't have to do anything because I'm the fastest, it's that easy, okay? Now the problem with that is the people who are not the fastest in the world, they can work really hard and they can like really like train like crazy and get to that level, right? So the same level that somebody doesn't take an effort, somebody who needs that effort can work up to that, and then they're equal, right? So it's a shame that the person who doesn't need to put the effort at all is now at that same level. So what that person should do, who doesn't take any effort, should be using that to their advantage to go even higher, to go even better, okay? They should be spending that effort to say, they shouldn't say, I don't have to work because I'm better than everyone else. They should be like, I should work so I stay way above everybody else, right? This is my big revelation about Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails gives you the tools so that you can do things super quick, super fast, whereas it would take somebody else a lot more hours to do, right? Something that takes you probably like 2 minutes might take someone an hour or two to like code up, right? But that doesn't mean you just rest at that level. Doesn't mean you spend the 1 to 2 minutes to do it and then go do something else or whatever, right? What you should do is use that other 1 hour and 58 minutes to write even better code than that person, okay? What you should be doing is taking that extra time that you now have, okay, to write stuff that's more robust than that person, okay? And the biggest revelation I had about this was test-driven development, which is one of the things I'll talk about when we get to lecture 8, okay? Test-driven development slows you right back down to the speed of somebody who's not using a framework like Ruby on Rails. But it gives you more robust, tested code, which is awesome, okay? So that's what you guys should think when you think about Ruby on Rails. It'll take you no time to do something, okay? But that doesn't mean you type really quick and then you leave. You use that extra time to make the code even better, okay? Any questions? All right, lecture 8, here we go. Where do you go from here? So this is all about little tidbits of information for you guys, okay? With very brief 1 to 5 sentence lectures about each one, which means that if you kind of understand it, great. If you don't, you just know you can go look up more stuff, okay? So I've kind of divided it into a couple sections. Okay, you guys have a pretty good functioning app right now. Where do you take it next? Okay, so the first thing you guys can do is basically make your app production ready. Okay, and what does that mean? That basically means finishing up little things so that you're happy to put it up on a web server and show it to the world. Okay, so what do you need to do before you do that? I would say at minimum you need some styling. Okay, the app does not look good. And the app It looks downright terrible, actually. All right, you don't want to show anybody this. You don't want to be like, guys, check this out. 8 weeks, amazing, right? Like I could write that up in Microsoft Word and hit save as web page, and I'm done. Right? You don't want to do that. So you probably want to start with some CSS. Nell hosts a great workshop, so go talk to her, and she'll teach you all about CSS. Okay? Akinyele just bought a book on HTML and CSS. Go steal his book, and you know, however you need to do that. Okay? And if you are a seasoned web developer, what you probably want to do is add some kind of fancy functionality like JavaScript. Okay, short lecture on CSS and JavaScript. These are both client-side languages. Okay, that means the browser understands them just like the browser understands HTML. Remember, the browser does not understand Ruby. That's why we use ERB. ERB gets processed into HTML, which the browser understands. CSS and JavaScript are understood by the browser. So that means you can send HTML and CSS and JavaScript directly over to the browser, and the browser will know what to do with it. Okay. If you don't understand any of these, I recommend starting with CSS. Okay. JavaScript adds a lot of fancy functionality to your web app, but it's not necessary. You can actually get away with writing very, very, very powerful apps without a single ounce of JavaScript. Okay. And for those who are curious as to what jQuery is, because you probably hear jQuery a lot and see it on a lot of applications. jQuery is simply a library built on top of JavaScript. Just like Ruby on Rails is built on top of Ruby to help you write web apps, jQuery is built on top of JavaScript to help you do a lot of things easier rather than using JavaScript. Okay, I'd say I'm a better jQuery programmer than I'm a JavaScript programmer. Okay, I understand the jQuery library a lot more than I understand native JavaScript. Okay, so for example, in JavaScript, to send an AJAX request, you have to write like 5 or 6 lines of code. Okay, in jQuery, it's 1 line of code. Okay, so that's CSS and JavaScript, both client-side languages. Now, for those in the, how many people here do know CSS? How many people here know JavaScript? Okay, if you haven't figured it out already, you're probably dying to know where the hell do I put my CSS so I can just style my page. Okay, you do it in the asset pipeline. Okay, really short lecture on the asset pipeline. First thing you need to know, just put your code in there. Okay, create CSS files and style sheets, create JS files in JavaScript. They will be included on every single one of your pages. Okay, if you're curious how that's done, you should look at your layout. Okay, remember, application layout is every page, right? Remember, the render page puts all our content into here. Those first 2 lines here, not the first 2, but first whatever. Style sheet link tag, JavaScript include tag. Those include something called application.css and application.js. Those in turn include everything that's in your style sheets folder and everything that's in your JavaScript folder. Okay, so you can put a CSS file in there and it'll be included on every one of your pages. That means, though, that you have to be very, very diligent about your JavaScript functions and your CSS classes because they're included on every page. So make sure they're unique. Okay, so if you have a button in one place and a button in another place and they're styled differently, okay, that same CSS is going to be included on both, like together, right? So make sure you don't have conflicts. Okay, so you put them in there. Long story short, what the asset pipeline does is it wraps all your CSS and JavaScript into one gigantic file. Okay, and then that way, when your code is production ready, you're not making a request for 50 CSS files and 50 JavaScript files. You're making one request for one file. Doesn't matter how big that file is, the number of requests, okay, is down to 1. This is unlike things like WordPress. Okay, go look at a WordPress site and go inspect the elements. Okay, you can see at the very top, there's probably at least 20 CSS style sheets in there. And they're really big and they take forever to download. Okay, it's pretty bad. That's one of the #1 things I hate about WordPress, actually. Actually, it's funny. If WordPress just implemented this, they'd solve all their problems. Okay, so that's the asset pipeline. Add some images. Okay, like you can make a website look really fancy just with really nice photos and very minimal HTML. Okay, don't make the mistake of making your buttons images. You can do all that in CSS. Okay, but little images like an image of a mountain, an image of yourself, stuff like that. Okay, where do you put your images? Throw them into the asset pipeline as well. Okay, so it's app assets image is, yep, images. And then you just call it this way. Okay, there's a view helper called image tag. throw in the image name, and it'll find that image and display it for you. Okay. Lastly, you need some security. This is the hardest part to learn by yourself. Okay. I wish we had a lecture on it, but again, it is pretty heavy. So here's what I recommend. There is a tutorial by Michael Hartle that is probably worth all you guys going through. It's long, I warn you. Okay, I think it took me a couple months to get through, right? And that wasn't working on it like 24/7, but it's a long tutorial and it goes through a lot. I got a really good start from Michael Hartle. That's how I got my start. Again, I disagree with very, very few things. Like, again, I like to teach the full RESTful resource, but everything else Michael Hartle does is incredible. His tutorial is incredible. He teaches you so much, and he basically teaches you how to build Twitter, okay, from basically scratch, from Ruby on Rails scratch. Okay, one of the things he goes through is building your own authentication system. That means building your own users, building your own password system, encrypting your passwords, checking those passwords, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so really handy tutorial. Okay, once you learn how to create users and how to authenticate them, in other words, how you verify that that's the person they say they are by verifying the password, and once the person signed in, you will get into things like before actions. And that's called authorization. Once you know who the person is, do you authorize them to do certain actions? Yes, they can view a blog post, but they can't edit a blog post, things like that. Okay? You will need this before you launch your app live. Otherwise, people can just go to your website and add blog posts and destroy blog posts and all that stuff, which you don't really want, right? Unless it's just a test app, right? That's the last thing I think you need to make your app production ready. Okay? So that's where you can go through on Rails to make your app ready. Now, after that, you may want to increase your knowledge a little bit more. So what else can you do? One thing you can do is make your app a little bit more robust. Okay, so one of the first things you can do is look into active record validations. Active record validations are very simple pieces of code that say your model cannot be saved unless it meets certain criteria. Okay, so for example, you may say that it has to have a title. A blog post has to have a title. Blog post doesn't have a title, you're not going to save it. Okay, you can do things like verify numericality. So it has to be a number, for example. Like maybe it's age. Age has to be a number. It can't be a text. It can't be like letters. You can verify like that what they type belongs to an array or something like that of different values. Okay, you can do all these certain types of validations. So active record validation is a very common thing to learn when you're starting out Rails. Okay, make sure your model's robust. Means your database is robust, right? Because if those can't be saved, you'll never get bad data into your database. After you made your app a little bit more robust, you might want to add some functionality to your app. Okay. Now, once you learn this next lesson, you will learn, like, I would say a huge chunk to make a lot of different apps. There's very little stopping you after you learn this. Okay. And that's active record relations. And I really hope I got that term right. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called, active record relations. What this means is tying models to each other. Okay. Me and Nell were talking about this before class. We're talking about a user and a profile being linked together, right? So you have a user account and you have a profile. So the user account may be email address and password, and then your profile might be first name, last name, age, all that stuff, right? If you want an idea of where to go from here, you've created a blog post, and typically blog posts have comments, right? So a really good place to start is to add comments to your blog post. There's a typo there. That belongs to should be lowercase. Okay, so active record relations are ways to tie active records together. Okay, so you can picture a blog post has many comments, right? So there's like a bunch of comments. Like think about YouTube or Facebook, right? You have a post and it has a bunch of comments. Maybe a post has multiple likes. You can add likes. Likes would be its own RESTful resource, right? Things like that. All right. So there's has many belongs to, hasn't belongs to many, has one, has many through. Okay, these associations will get you really far. Okay, there's a lot to learn in those. To be honest, there's some extra convention over configuration you have to learn. Like has and belongs to many, for example. You need a join table, and you have to name that join table a certain way. Okay, so things like that you'll have to learn. But very powerful stuff. And once those are set up, your like ability to deal with models is super easy. You can type things like blog post .comments to get the array of comments back. Okay, you can do comments.blog post to get the blog post that the comment belongs to, stuff like that. Okay. Lastly, to add more functionality to your app, you may want to start to look into libraries, just like you use jar files in Java, right? Just like you use DLLs in .NET, if they still use that, okay? Ruby on Rails uses something called gems, okay? Gems are just like jar files, just like DLLs. They're packaged up libraries, okay? Now, Ruby on Rails actually, your app actually ships with a bunch of gems already. If you go look at this file called the gem file, there's a bunch of gems specified in there already. If you want to add more libraries, it's a matter of adding those libraries to that file, okay, and installing them. Something I recommend very highly before you get into this is you go to the, like this is managed by a gem called Bundler, okay? I recommend you read the Bundler documentation. I went 3 years on Ruby on Rails, and I did not properly understand gemfile and gemfile.lock. I thought I knew it, and then one day working with this guy at my former work, and he's like, nope, that's completely wrong. So I recommend you read that, the difference between gemfile and gemfile.lock. Short lecture, gemfile is a guideline, gemfile.lock is kind of like a Bible. You usually start with a guideline, you do Bundler, gemfile.lock becomes your kind of Bible. All right. So that's Ruby on Rails. Outside of Ruby on Rails, some tools that you should learn. If you don't know it by now, you should really, really, really learn Git. Okay, it's by far one of the most popular source control systems. It's really smart. It works super well over the internet, which is huge. That's one of the best parts about it. Like, you don't have to set up your own server or whatever. The services like GitHub and Bitbucket that use it, okay, where you can interact with your teammates. Like, if you have a team and 3 people know Git and 3 people don't, those other 3 people become very annoying, okay? It's like really hard to work with them, okay? Our whole team knows Git. It's like so easy to work with everybody, okay? I am, again, I've mentioned this before, I am very proud of a Git series that I have created, kcd.com/videos. Check it out. There's a couple crucial pieces that are missing, but it should get you on a good start, okay? Git's very important. Heroku, not a must. It is my deployment choice for years now, okay? It can get a little bit expensive, okay? But what Heroku is a deployment platform. In other words, a place to put your web code and host your website, okay? Rather than running it off your machine, let somebody who does host server space out on the internet to do it. Yes, question?
I have a very basic doubt, which is confusing. What's the difference between Heroku, Amazon Web Services, and a normal server?
Okay, what's the difference between Amazon Web Services, Heroku, and any other server? Basically, Amazon Web Services is a bit bigger. They actually offer a lot of different things, but one of the things they do offer is web hosting. Okay, what's the difference between like Amazon Web Services web hosting, Heroku? There's also things like what's the one that you guys do, DigitalOcean, things like that. Okay, what's the difference? Basically, at the base level, nothing. Okay, at the base level, they're offering you a computer somewhere, like a virtual computer somewhere, where you can put your code, run a web server, and the web requests can come into and return responses back. Okay, at the basic level, there is no difference. Okay, the question is the service that they offer to allow you to do that. Okay, so in other words, their tech support. If something goes wrong, what's the tech support behind it, right? How much space do they offer you, right? What's the actual specs on the computer they offer you? Like, is it a faster computer, slower computer, whatever, this and that, right? Can it handle 1,000 requests? Can it handle 1,000,000 requests? Okay. My biggest difference between all these, and the reason I choose Heroku, is how do you actually get set up and how do you get your code on there? Okay. Some offer you a virtual box, a version of Linux, and then you're just free to go. You go on there, you install Ruby, you install your code, you spin up the Rails server, and it's good to go. Okay. I like Heroku because you actually don't have to do any of that. Okay. Heroku acts at, do you know Git? Heroku acts as a Git repository. That's how you interact with it. You literally just push your code to Heroku, and then Heroku detects what code you're pushing. It says, oh, you're pushing a Ruby on Rails app. I'm going to set up a Ruby on Rails server for you, spin it up, and serve it up to the web. So you don't have to do any of that stuff. Whereas a lot of these other services, you do have to do that stuff, right? Some of the differentiating factors as well is like, you know, Heroku offers add-ons. Amazon might offer add-ons, so on and so forth, right? Like other things that you might need to do with your web server. Some of these offer better monitoring of your server, right? So is your server, your uptime's 100%, your downtime, whatever, this and that, right? Does that answer your question? Okay. So I choose Heroku because, again, it's like a Git repository. I say Ruby on Rails allows, like, basically removes development from getting in the way of creativity. I say Heroku removes deployment from getting in the way of creativity. Because basically with Heroku, I did a demo of this actually at a talk like a year ago or something. And I basically created a brand new Rails app, deployed it out to the web, and had it running in under like 4 minutes. Right? Like that's how quick it is. Like once your dev environment is set up, you can basically say Rails new, Rails push, and then it's up. It's really sweet. Okay, so Heroku is a great place to learn. There are a couple other sites that are doing this now. Heroku's been around for a while. They actually increased their pricing to $7 a month if you want an app that's fully running all the time. Okay, if your app can stand to sleep for 6 hours a day, then it's free. Okay. Lastly, you can improve your development. Test-driven development. Has anybody heard of this? Test-driven development is the idea that you write automated tests before you write your code. This is what red-green refactor means. You write tests that fail, and they'll naturally fail because there's no code to make them pass. Okay, that's red. Then you write code to make it pass, that's green. And then you refactor your code and make sure the stuff still passed. Okay, there's a lot of really good philosophies on test-driven development. There's a lot of good things about saying, like, if you do test-driven development, you think more in terms of the requirements rather than the implementation, right? And then you write the code to fit that implementation. And then the nice thing about it is when you're done, your automated tests are already written, right? So I had the misfortune of having to go back into an app and write all the tests for it, like after 2 or 3 years of development, right? Like, and I tell you, writing like 300-400 tests is not as fun as if it was done in the beginning. Okay, test-driven development. Little confession here. Again, I've been doing Ruby on Rails for about 5 years now. I only recently, like I'm talking like months, in the last couple months, have gotten into test-driven development. Okay, I didn't see the value in it. Everybody told me all the value in it. I just couldn't grasp the value. Like I understood the value. I just couldn't like push myself to do it. And only recently I'm starting to feel it. Ruby meetups. There is one in Ottawa, ottawaruby.ca. Really good group of people. I myself haven't made it in a long time, but every time I go, I learn a lot, a crazy amount. Even if it's just the fact that I talk to people who mention about 100 words that I don't understand, and I have to go home and look them up. Okay? Really, really good people. It's run by a guy named Michael Prendergast, really nice guy. A lot of Shopify guys get involved too. There's a guy named Edward Ocampo-Gooding, really cool guys, like really prominent in the Ottawa development community. Does a lot for this city, actually. Check it out. A lot of great Ruby developers, okay? And then the last thing I can recommend you guys do is just start working, okay? Like literally, like as soon as this ends, finish your exams and then start working, okay? What does that mean? You guys need some ideas? Build off the website that you just built, okay? Add resume entries to that website and make it become your resume website, okay? Or start from scratch. Try to recreate everything we did in class, okay? Because I tell you, this knowledge is gonna go very fast. And as you start using it in practice a lot, it's gonna go so fast. I love that some of you guys are already using it in your class projects. Okay, it's already in there, which is great. Ask friends and family to build them a free website. Okay, just ask them, say like, can I build you a website? Do you have a business? Like send her an email, okay? ByteSite got started by me sending a mass email to every single person I knew. Okay, I just like literally went through every one of my emails, auto-completed everything. I said like, okay, guys, I'm available for hire. Who wants a website built? And that's how I got started. Okay, do that. Get somebody, get some project under your belt that you can build. Okay, or partner with other people. You have a cool idea and like I want to build something. Okay, the biggest piece of advice I can give you guys is don't let anything stop you. Okay, because you'll get a lot of people who say like, isn't that Twitter or isn't that Uber or is it like they'll say like, doesn't that exist already? Oh, have you heard of this? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're building the exact same app that already exists. Okay, that's not the point. At this phase in your guys' career, it's all about getting as much experience as you can coding. Okay, so just code. Doesn't matter what it takes. Just get some coding done. Okay, and you'll find by the time you get to your 3rd or 4th Rails app, okay, by the time you get to the 3rd or 4th Rails app, it gets so easy, okay, that you just create apps and apps and apps and apps. Okay, my Rails projects app is so big. there's like 50, 60 projects in there. Okay, now a lot of them died, obviously, and not all of them active. But it's so easy to do Rails new my app and just start coding. Okay, that it's just like anytime you get an idea, you just get it down, or you start coding it. Okay, so just get to coding. Okay, that is it. Feel free to email me. I can't promise I'll get back to you in a timely manner or at all, to be honest. But feel free to email me and reach out. I always love these kind of things. They always invigorate me. My 2 first hires at ByteSite came from tutorial sessions. Okay, so who knows? You guys could be working with me at some point. Who knows? Okay, that's pretty much it. Any questions? No? Yeah, question.
What's your time frame for having like all the resources on your site?
What's the time frame for having
Like,
all?
are you gonna ever take it down? Or are you
Oh,
gonna wait
no.
till the next one to take it down?
I probably won't take this down, to be honest. Like I might edit it like every now and then, but I think the slides and everything are pretty solid at this point. So I'm probably gonna keep them up for a pretty long time. Yeah. So all that stuff will be there. Any other questions? Okay, so what I'm gonna do, I mean, it is 8:30, but what I'm going to do is I'm gonna stop the recording, and I'm just going to probably spend 5 minutes. Is that all right with you? Or if you guys want to leave, go ahead. I'm just probably, for those who don't know CSS, I'm just going to spend 5 minutes and do a really quick CSS on this site. Okay, so the code is there, and you can see how it comes to life, right? And just so you can see a little demo of how that works out, and then that'll be pretty much it. Cool. All right, so stop.
While you do that, I want to thank you again for coming out. This is incredible to have you here, and I hope you guys learned a lot. For me, learning